And now it's my distinct pleasure to invite Deputy Undersecretary of the U.S. Army, Mario Diaz, to provide a keynote on the Army's role in countering China in the Indo-Pacific. We often think about the Navy when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, but the Army also has a tremendous role to play. In this role, Mr. Mario Diaz is the Principal Civilian Senior Advisor to the Secretary of the Army with management and oversight of civilian leader assignments. The Army's mission is to deploy, fight, and win our nation's wars by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance as part of the joint force of all U.S. military. As it turns out, this is a critical component in the rising China challenge. So please help me welcome Mario Diaz to the stage. Mr. Diaz's keynote will be followed by a fireside chat.
Well, Nilu, thank you so much for the kind introduction. Good morning, everybody. I think there's still folks trickling in, so I'll go a little slow and get things started this morning. Thank you, Chancellor Diermeier. Get a chance to meet you, and I look forward to not only the rest of the day, but some more time to discuss the ongoing partnerships between our Army, this great institution, and the greater community. This is an important seminar and summit, I believe, for very many reasons. It's critical for our young Americans in uniform, out of uniform, and I had the opportunity to speak to an ROTC class this morning early. They got me up early, and first thing was some bright-eyed, bushy-tailed cadets and one midshipman. We had to have a token midshipman in there. It was great. And they asked some great questions about, what our future is like and what can we expect, and it was just a great way to start. That aspect of it, but also the fact that we're having this discussion about national security at this esteemed institution and in this state. Geography-wise, we have a lot of our dialogue on national security focused, whether it's on the East Coast and the Beltway or on the West Coast. And I think it's important that we don't disproportionately have that particular dialogue focused in those areas, because we need to have this type of discussion at these institutions amongst this population in and around the society that is so important. So I applaud the geographic diversity that's allowing us to have this type of discussion and integrate multiple viewpoints. I'm honored to join such a great list of distinguished speakers that have been here thus far and that will continue to be here. Again, we see these types of dialogues in other locations, but I just want to commend the fact that I happen to have some roots in Tennessee. My wife is from Tennessee. We've been married 32 years, and after 30 years in the Army, she got to pick where we retired, so we have a home in Knoxville. She's actually from Middle Tennessee area, so even though I have to go up to D.C. to work and have a small condo there, we consider Knoxville and Tennessee our home, so it's a little bit personal homecoming to me as well, as I was stationed as a brand new second lieutenant in 1990, just up the road at Fort Campbell. My focus today, as Nilu highlighted, is going to be how the U.S. Army fits into the critical activities and defense initiatives, specifically regarding your Army's role in the Indo-Pacific. The United States Army is at a pivotal moment of our history, and after 2 decades of what we considered ground-based, low-intensity conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan, and as well as other locations like Syria and to a lesser degree, hotspots in Africa, we have been the lead service focused on operations. But now we've had to shift our efforts to what we're calling the focus on large-scale combat operations, and in particular, large-scale combat operations in the 21st century operating environment. We have significant history in large-scale combat operations in the previous century, but going forward, as all of you know, technology, the interaction with society at a greater level, and the expectations of the way that we conduct operations is much more scrutinized and much more visible to our overall population. To be precise, today I'm going to talk about what we call in the Army the Title X responsibilities, and as the Deputy Undersecretary, In the service, like other services, we focus on our Title X responsibilities, that is manning, training, organizing, and equipping our total force, active guard and reserve, our civilian workforce, and to make sure how we fit into supporting our combatant commanders, those geographic and functional combatant commands that actually do the war fighting. I'll talk a little bit again about what we do in the Army to support that. Perhaps during the Q&A or the fireside chat, I can elaborate a little bit more on ongoing operations, activities, other investments that are going on now based on my 30 years in uniform and some of the relationships and dialogue that I have with current military leaders as well. So, how does your Army help deter and counter the threats in the Indo-Pacific region? And let me be very clear and unequivocal to start off and state our policy and our perspective is that conflict against China is not inevitable. There are numerous avenues of appropriate competition and even areas of cooperation where in the region, the United States, the People's Republic of China, and our allies and partners can interact. But it must be within the established rules and norms of the international system because, as we all know, a free and open Indo-Pacific, which has enabled unparalleled economic and economic growth and prosperity for generations, is what we should all be focused on and nations should strive for. So, your Army. First and foremost, we're part of a joint force, as you all know. And we'll continue to focus our efforts along three broad efforts that I'll highlight today. The first is by modernizing our equipment and our capabilities while maintaining relevant capabilities into the future. Secondly, by developing new operating concepts that confront these 21st century challenges that I spoke about leading off my comments. And there are challenges and opportunities in this environment. And thirdly, by conducting enduring campaigns. What we need to be able to do by conducting these enduring campaigns, forward position in the Indo-Pacific, is to blunt any efforts by the People's Republic of China on any malign actions that they may do or may plan to do, or any posture that they have in the region that is negative or not reinforcing the good established rules-based order. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways that we've done this. A foundational effort, if some of you are aware, that we were able to do in 2018 was establish Army Futures Command and really rethought and reorganized the way that we both develop and prioritize emerging and modernization technology and capabilities. I also want to highlight the great work that is being done here at Vanderbilt through the partnership with Army Futures Command in the Pathfinder program. It's incredible. I got an update on it today. I look forward to spending some time this afternoon. Pockets of innovation where there's a partnership at the local level with academia and our Army is critically important. It's helped moving the needle, and frankly, it's making us better because, as you know, there's a lot of bureaucracy in the way that the acquisition process takes place. And being able to fast-track some of this stuff and these capabilities has really been able to help us be more effective, especially in the areas of emerging technology. Why are we doing this? Because we can no longer assume that we'll have secure supply lines. We can't ever assume anymore that there'll be a permissive operating environment. We can't ever assume anymore that the enemy won't have equal or more capable long-range fires against us. And we have to be able to plan against near-peer adversaries. The ability to stand off, to collect, to build our combat power, and then to fight on the time and place of our choosing is probably gone. So over the last years during the establishment of Army Futures Command, we've been able to make some impressive gains in certain areas. One of them has been in the areas of long-range precision fires, where we just fielded the first increment of the precision strike missile. And like any good Army or other military organization, we have an acronym for that. It's called PRISM. Those of you may be familiar with the PRISM missile. Because in the vast regions and distances of the Indo-Pacific, we needed to up our game in long-range precision fires. And I'll talk a little bit more about what we've been able to do in that portfolio. But needless to say, the PRISM has given us the ability in the Army to strike at targets up to 500 kilometers. And we'll see additional increments of the PRISM give us increased range and the ability to strike even at sea-based targets in the future, in the near future, with our organic artillery systems. And also in the Indo-Pacific, we've been able to field the multi-domain task force. Now, we have a couple of them fielded. We have one in the Indo-Pacific based out of Hawaii, and we also have one based in Europe. The multi-domain task forces give us, at the theater level, the ability to synchronize our effects, some of them lethal, some of them non-lethal, but primarily through our long-range fires, to reach out and touch the enemy in a way that we haven't been able to do before, and to synchronize it at the speed across multi-domains that we haven't been able to do in our previous past. Some of that capability now resides in long-range fires through our HIMARS system, so you're very familiar, I'm sure, with what HIMARS has been able to provide to Ukrainians and their ability to put at risk Russian assets to which they normally thought were protected. But needless to say, as we go forward, we know, and many of you know, that if you can be seen or if you can be collected on, you can be targeted. So we have to extend out our ranges. We have to provide our warfighting formations an increased capability to sense at distance and then to be able to target at distance. I also want to talk a little bit more about a recent fielding that we had. I spoke about PRISM, but their spectrum of the long-range fires portfolio or the strategic fires portfolio is pretty significant. So at the low end, we have the HIMARS firing Gimler's rockets now, our ATACMs. With the PRISM coming on board, we have increased capability. And just this past week, through the multi-domain task force that we have been exercising in the Indo-Pacific, we've been able to deploy what has been called before the mid-range capable. So we came up with a little bit better name. We call it the Typhoon. It's the Typhoon Strategic Mid-Range Fires capability. Smurf, I know that's funny, but you have to have something like that. But I didn't come up with the name, but it's memorable, right? The Typhoon fires both the Army-Navy Standard Missile 6 and the Tomahawk land attack missile, and that provides a mid-range capability. It's on the ground right now in the Philippines, taking part in exercise Salakanib. So we are demonstrating, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means to be able to exercise capabilities, what that impact has on the region with our allies and partners, and how that is viewed by the People's Republic of China in terms of a capability that puts things that they value at risk. Also, we're taking advantage of the existing capabilities and making sure we are able to employ them and demonstrate them not only to the region in Indo-Pacific, but to a broader world scope. As we speak, a contingent of 5 specialized Army sea vessels, you heard me right, Army sea vessels, are steaming from Virginia to Gaza. They're going to be establishing, as you know, in the open press, a modular causeway to deliver humanitarian assistance to the Palestinians in the upcoming week. These 5 vessels are approximately part of 130 other Army watercraft that we maintain, and we keep them poised to sustain the joint force in the maritime and littoral regions, not only of the Indo-Pacific, but the rest of the world. That's a key capability that the Army provides, and maybe during Q&A, if you have any follow-up on what we also have been doing with Army watercraft, which is an increased capability that we're putting investment on, happy to discuss that. This is a good opportunity to transition a little bit to focusing on the preparation for a potential conflict within the Indo-Pacific region. Because what we've had to do is, again, change some of our paradigms, because as I alluded to, conflicts in the 20th century, the world wars, Korea, Desert Storm, we have been designated the main effort to primarily establish the end state and achieve the national objectives or our objectives of our coalition partners in various military operations. But now, I think as Nilu highlighted, in Indo-Pacific, which is an area dominated by maritime and littoral regions, the Army may not be seen as the main effort. And that's okay, but it also is not seen, from my perspective, it should not be seen as not having a role whatsoever. Because when you look back, and a lot of the conclusions or assumptions that people have with regards to that hypothesis about the Army not being involved in the Indo-Pacific, I think it's founded on a couple of assumptions that we just need to consider and put in historic perspective. Most of the time when there's conflict spoken about in the Indo-Pacific, with particularly involving China, it's focused on it being short and sharp. It's focused on being fixed geography in and around the island of Taiwan. My humble opinion, personal humble opinion, if history is any guide, the current wars around the world are also affirming this. This type of conflict that we will face in the future will likely be a drawn-out affair. Even though we have plans that say that we can achieve objectives within days and weeks, I fear that we will probably have to be prepared for multiple months, if not years, for conflict. So even now, when Vladimir Putin conducted his special military operation, over 2 years have passed, and he hasn't achieved his objectives. And I probably think that most Russians would not have ever anticipated that this conflict would have lasted this long. So both in short and protracted conflict scenarios, the Army, we feel we must be an agent of change in providing numerous capabilities at scale. Lots of folks have discussed this in the recent past. Our leadership, our Secretary of the Army, our Chief of Staff, both past and present, have spoken about what our role would be in the Pacific, and they use different terms. Different articles have used different terms. Some have called the Army the linchpin service in the Indo-Pacific. Others have called it the backbone force. I prefer the descriptor of the foundational joint enabler. I think this best describes what role the Army plays in competition, crisis, and conflict in the Indo-Pacific. So I've already spoken about some of these or alluded to them, but let me be very clear. The Army's role in the Indo-Pacific, if we ever were to have to fight in and around either Taiwan or on a greater scale, will be to provide joint logistics at the theater level and sustain those operations across the joint force in a contested environment at scale. We haven't had to do that in over 70 years. We'd also be focused on protecting key assets, primarily through integrated air and missile defense networks. And, you know, as recently as last weekend, you see what a 21st century air onslaught with drones, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles can do in a very short period of time, and what type of capabilities would be required to defend assets at scale. So as you saw what happened last week in Israel, a very fixed area, we had very good early warning. They telegraphed their punch, but it was still, you know, something that we had to put a significant amount of resources on. If you could imagine, you know, extrapolating that out to various islands with allies and partners, protecting key assets, it would be a challenge. Lastly, what we focus on in the Indo-Pacific, and I spoke to a little bit, but clearly stating strategic long-range fires, both lethal and non-lethal types of fires, and presenting with those fires the enemy multiple dilemmas of both their ability to conduct their operations and protect assets that they need critical as part of any invasion force or any sustained operations that they may have to conduct. So for the final portion of these efforts, I just want to propose a question. How does the Army position distributed and dispersed land-based forces in and around sovereign nations within the Indo-Pacific region to be able to do those functions that I spoke about? The way we achieve that, I believe, and the way that we have been focused on is through what we're calling enduring campaigning. And this concept of enduring campaigning is something that is not just Army focused, it's joint and it's combined. But what we've been able to do is through our ideas and activities like joint training and readiness centers, of which we stood one up in 2020 the Joint Pacific Multinational Regional Readiness Center. That capability has allowed us to put in theater where we would be able to bring allies and partners together and train in the theater environments to not only build partner capacity and build trust, but to demonstrate that we can do that at scale in theater. Because most of you know, I believe, that the Army has two very significant national treasures in our combat training centers. We have one in California at Fort Irwin, and we have one at Fort Johnson, used to be called Fort Polk, but now Fort Johnson in Louisiana, our Joint Readiness Training Center. And those are world-class facilities that we do unbelievable training and build readiness. It's the gold standard. But that is here at the continental United States. We have been able to take some exportable capabilities, both in terms of instrumentation and the world-class types of environment that we want to replicate with an OPFOR that replicates fighting against a notional enemy that looks a lot like the People's Republic of China, with their equipment in the environment that they would be conducting those operations. And more importantly, not just do it with ourselves and our joint partners, but we bring in key allies and partners to do so. So even as recently as last November, we completed a 5,000 soldier active duty reserve National Guard, which are going to be critical to any fight in the Indo-Pacific. This is not just going to be an active duty type of operation. You know, when we fight in these large-scale operations, it's a national endeavor. So we were able to bring in 5,300 all composed of the Army together. But we also brought in New Zealand, the United Kingdom, Indonesia, Thailand. So we built a capability and we built trust, which is the coin of the realm, frankly, in the Indo-Pacific. So again, despite the region being dominated by maritime environment, what the Army also brings is an unbelievable network of relationships. And this may seem kind of, doesn't really pass the common sense test, and you wonder why this is. Well, the Army's relationships with our fellow allies and partners is because most of the regional leaders within the Indo-Pacific, their national forces are led by Army officers because the preponderance of their forces are land-based forces. So, for example, the heads of Thailand, India, the Philippines, Republic of Korea, and Australia are all led by Army officers, and that's why we have a great network and we get a chance to work with them. And this kinship that we've developed over years, that I personally participated in exercises in each of those countries, builds a level of trust and interoperability. Because as we know, interoperability is more than about ones and zeros in our equipment talking together or the procedures working together. It's the interpersonal relationships and skills that we bring, and that's critically important. And we do this through certain other operations that we have focused and resourced, because as you know as well, if you don't have a key way to put all this together and get it resourced through our systems and processes within the DoD, then we don't get the necessarily resourcing to make sure we can operationalize it. So we focused it and called this effort over the past couple of years Operation Pathways. And some of you may be familiar with that. What we've been able to do with Operation Pathways is be able to upgun some of our exercises to a level that we haven't been able to achieve before. So over the past couple of months, we've been able to do Talisman Sabre within Australia. It involved not just U.S. and Australia, but 11 other nations, 35,000 military personnel taking part on multiple locations within Australia, back to Hawaii and other locations. We have something called Super Garuda Shield, which again takes place in the theater with 17 nations, primarily based on the bilateral relationship between U.S. and Indonesia, but we expanded that to 7 other nations, and it was focused on a lot of multi-domain operations. And you heard what I spoke about with Salak-Anib and what we're able to achieve in the Philippines. But this just isn't where we're stopping. Over the next year, in fiscal year 25, as we're building out our budget, we're going to increase the exercise scope and scale twofold, 200%. We're going to have 11 additional exercises that will be focused primarily in the Indo-Pacific. Okay, we can't just talk about it. We can't just say we're resourcing it. We have to be in the theater focus. There's a concept that some of you may be aware of called a Navy in being. The Navy is meant to out be sailing and being present, showing the flag, having the fleet forward. We believe that an Army in being is equally as important, to be out forward. We can build readiness, we can train at home station, but if we're not forward working with our allies, demonstrating capabilities, then we're not fully utilizing the deterrent capabilities and what we bring to our nation. I'm going to highlight a couple other things before I conclude. One of them is AUKUS. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the trilateral security partnership between Australia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. It's critically important going forward to the region. These are major players, and I know the UK may not fit exactly into the Indo-Pacific, but they consider themselves rightfully so, just like us. They're an Indo-Pacific nation. Now, most of the attention from AUKUS has gotten, rightfully so, I think, focused on what they call Pillar 1, which is building capabilities within the submarine fleet and a trilateral partnership to build increased nuclear capable submarines and undersea capabilities. That's great, but that's going to take not just years, but decades to operationalize. Where we've seen a lot more movement and where the Army's been more involved has been what we call Pillar 2, which is focusing on multi-domain capabilities and technologies. So that reads long-range precision fires, deep sensing, resilient autonomous technologies, counter-UAS, contested logistics, and I think the signature aspect of this is the stand-up of a combined multi-domain task force, which we are building now, and we have officers from Australia and from the UK that are in Hawaii building a combined multi-domain task force. Because what we've been able to understand with what we've learned from our multi-domain task force is a lot of it comes from the authorities that are developed within that task force. And as you operate across the spectrum, in conflict, there's very clear authorities. But when you're in competition, some of the abilities to do things are based off of national caveats. And together with these three nations working together, we can get after a lot more capabilities, especially in that contested period prior to conflict. I don't want to focus too much on it, and maybe in Q&A we could talk about a concept of joint interior lines. But what also we have learned is you've got to be present, and you've got to be present in the right locations. And if you're familiar with the Clausewitzian concept of interior lines, it's having the ability to short circuit both logistics, command and control, and overall maneuver within an area quicker than your enemy because you have the ability to maneuver inside that space. Right now, the PRC has solid interior lines. What we're trying to do through our increased posture and working with our allies and partners is hot loop some of those interior lines, make sure that we can take advantage of our capabilities to move in and around, and then put some aspects, again, of what the PRC values at risk because of those relationships that we have with our allies and partners. We also have been able to continue to modernize with other experimentation. And I don't know how many of you have been able to either read about or participate in what we call Project Convergence. It's sponsored by Army Futures Command. And Project Convergence is an iterative annual experimentation. It's been going on now for 4 years, and it now includes multiple nations. And we're able to fail fast at certain types of innovation activities. We're able to bring allies and partners together and let them put their ideas on the table and then be able to integrate quickly, whether it's having software-defined capability within our radios and making sure that we can interoperate better, or tackle the challenges of targeting in a congested environment, or the role of AI and ML as we go forward. So happy to talk about what we're doing in the field of experimentation as well. I think that it's also important to talk about what we've learned from watching the way that operations are currently ongoing, not necessarily in the Indo-Pacific, but what we've observed in other locations. So there's two current, very helpful, illustrative examples. The first one is what the Houthi rebels have been able to achieve by denying sea lines of communication in the Gulf of Aden with relatively meager and some would argue no true military capabilities. So this irregular force with minimal cost and capabilities has truly threatened the interest of the entire international economy. Another clear example is what the Ukrainians have been able to do in the destruction of numerous Russian capital ships and a virtual sidelining of the Russian Black Sea Fleet by a nation that doesn't really even have a navy. Those two examples are really showing what 21st century conflict is going to look like, how we have to be able to adapt, and what we need to be able to bring if we're not necessarily the primary component, but how we can contribute as a joint and combined force. Because if you could really just put yourself in the mindset of imagining what a U.S. Army or Marine Corps, I'm a big fan of Marines, fought alongside a lot of Marines, they're great. What a capable Army or Marine Corps force with the right technology, placed in the right strategic location or choke point, what we could do to put the PRC at risk and cause them to think about whether it's the right time or if that day is the right day to have their benign interest and start actualizing them. So in conclusion, when we talk about the U.S. Army, we're going to maintain our focus on being a land-based but also multi-domain capable force. We're going to keep focused on what our national defense strategy tells us to stay focused on, which is the Indo-Pacific, and focus on the pacing threat of being able to counter China and any opportunities or desires that they have to reunify with Taiwan. And that's what our national defense strategy tells us to do. But we're also going to have to understand that we live in a very flexible and unpredictable world. And to paraphrase what Trotsky said about war, we think lots of times we've got a good plan, but the Middle East or Europe, we may not be interested in it, but it's interested in us. And we have to stay flexible on what we have to be able to do and provide capabilities while still maintaining our priority in the Indo-Pacific. We have to continue to build trust not only with our own population, not only with our joint partners, but as I highlighted, with our allies and partners. And that becomes our comparative advantage over the PRC. Because what they have been able, or what they have done over the past couple of years in particular, and by their benign actions, by their heavy-handedness, by their focus on their bilateral relationships and heavy-handedness, again, with some of those partners in the region, they have thankfully forced some of our allies and partners to reconsider their relationships with them and see how we can have different opportunities to work together. So through all of this, through our modernized capabilities, through our resilient forward posture, our strong network, the Army seeks to make PRC's calculations of aggression a losing opportunity, a losing calculation today, tomorrow, and into the future. So we have challenges, but your Army is leaning in. We're focused on them, and we are an Army in being forward postured in the Indo-Pacific. We have the tools, the relationships, and the capabilities, and we're going to meet them head on. So I look forward to dialogue, whether it's your questions or during the fireside chat. So thank you so much, and look forward to talking some more.
Well, thank you so much, Mario. That was terrific. Appreciate all those remarks. I just want to say, you alluded to the fact that we're collaborating with our partners at Fort Campbell, and that's a huge privilege. And we all really appreciate the opportunity to be able to work with the service members there on innovation. You talked about the Chinese Navy, you talked about cyber. You didn't mention space, but I'm going to mention it. And of course the Navy, so airspace, cyber, Navy. What about the Army? What about I don't read as much about the Chinese Army. How do you expect that to play out? And I guess particularly if you want a use case to look at, use Taiwan as a use case. How does that work, the Chinese Army?
Well, thanks, Doug. That's a simple question, I'm sure, to answer. I apologize for neglecting to mention space. It was critical, it's probably in my speech somewhere, I just sped past it because I'm a pretty good reader of the room, and I think it was more effective to be talking at you than to be talking with you. So I cut out some of my speech, but when the parts I did cut out did include space, because the Army is the biggest consumer of space-based assets out of all of our joint forces. So we have a critical requirement. We have capabilities that we're building that are going to be space formations, land-based formations that will, have space in their title, but they're going to be able to tap into a lot of the capabilities that the Space Force will provide. We need assured position, navigation, and timing, and that's a critical aspect of our ability to maneuver, to fire effectively and precisely. So space is a critical enabler and something that we're investing in. Frankly, we are downsizing some of our traditional Army formations and capabilities to increase some of these space-based formations. So in particular, your question with regards to the People's Republic and their Army capability. I think that in the scenario that, that I addressed and that most of you are familiar with, would require them to do something and pull off an incredible feat of warfighting, which is a opposed landing on an island contested from some of the most 21st century capable formations that are positioned in Taiwan, through obviously any type of allies and partners that would be able to assist, and to do it at a scale that we haven't seen since Normandy. They are possessing of some of the capabilities, but frankly, they, I think themselves, are very concerned about their ability to do so. So anything that we can do to continue to provide, as I alluded to, with small-scale forces that are working in training and assisting with the Taiwans, and also giving them a capability to provide overmatch, like I alluded to with the Houthis or with the Ukrainians. I think the People's Republic is taking stock of that and taking a hard look and seeing if they're ready to do a very significant operation with their roll-on, roll-off ships that we can track and know when they're moving and put them at risk. So I do think it's important. And also, real highlight, I don't know if they have the, I think that they are concerned, I won't say it that way, I think they're concerned that they have the tactical and warfighting and leadership capability to pull it off. And I agree with them. I think that they're challenged to be able to do that just by the way that they're currently organized. They've shown some improvements. They have a joint force now. They do combat training center-like type of operations, but they're in no way like some of our forces and some of our leaders. And I just don't think that that is a current skill set or, frankly, value that they possess.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really insightful. So from the easy question that we just fielded there to an even easier question, like how do we move fast? So you talked about your background. I think you said commissioned second lieutenant. Fort Campbell is where you started your career. You've seen the last number of decades. You've seen kind of the time it takes to innovate, to develop new platforms, et cetera. So you used the word irregular when you were giving us the examples of what we've seen others do in defense of their homeland. Is that how we move faster? By being irregular, or are there other ways to move faster with innovation? Because we heard yesterday, for instance, from General Hawk, that it's about riding the wave because we can't create all the waves anymore. So can you talk a little bit about speed and what that's going to take?
Yeah, great. I think that we, like most of other nations, are creatures of our culture, of our government, of our values. So no, it's not going to be irregular for us. Because that's not how we do things, that's not the way we're organized. But I do think what it will be diffused. And the examples that I highlighted, and more importantly, what I intend to be a part of and learn more from what goes on here at Vanderbilt, is just another lily pad example of innovation taking place at the right level with the right participants, whether it's 101st or 5th Group, and the great participation and leadership by your chancellor and your team here to meet in the middle and say, what are the problems? How can we solve them? More importantly for us, I think, as we spoke about, it's having a capability like Army Futures Command to have that level of innovation out, and then to make sure that we organize and prioritize and get the best of breed to come up rapidly. But we're still going to be an Army, we're still going to be a DOD, and we're still going to be a government that does things in a way that is driven by the processes that have been established for us. I spoke to ROTC cadets this morning and had great questions. And one of the fundamental aspects is that we are not just responsible to our executive leadership, we're responsible for civilian control. The military includes the legislators. And they define how we do the acquisition process. So what I hope, and I think there's been a lot of consensus, and I think this gets to the diffusion, I think what we're going to see is more of a one-way approach to do that, and maybe have a bifurcated or trilateral approach to do something. So I would commend you, if you haven't read it before already, the book Kill Change by Chris Brose. Chris Brose, staffer to Senator McCain, very significant graduate of SAIS and great thinker. He really proposed that we have a traditional way to do things, but we also have a way to focus our kill chain and hot loop the process rapidly. And I think that that's what we're going to see with some of the reform that's going on in this process. I think there's growing consensus that we have to have an alternate path that's quicker, that's cheaper, more decentralized, and allows us to field things. Because technology is, especially in the software side, turns so fast. When we're seeing what happens with UASs, and we're seeing what's happening with drones, that technology, we can't have a 7-year acquisition process to counter those types of things. So that's what I think we'll see.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you. Yeah, great answer. My takeaway from that answer is that Vanderbilt's the solution to faster innovation. I think you said that in there.
I think I did say that, and
Yeah.
I think that Vanderbilt will definitely play a key role.
Thank you, sir. Recruiting, retention. You talked about talking with our amazing ROTC student cadets. We're super proud of them. We have a question from the participants here. How are you thinking about addressing that challenge? I know you're thinking a lot about it, to ensure we have soldiers ready to fight a conflict, and I think you alluded to this, a potentially very drawn-out conflict. How do you think about the recruiting and retention aspects of the mission?
Well, thanks for the question. I think that about 2 years ago, we were faced with some pretty stark data, and it was one of those problems that I think we knew at certain levels, but when it was confronted or when it was presented to us at the senior levels, it really hit us with the, like a cold slap in the face. And that was we were not going to meet our mission, and that we had no prospect of meeting it in the next 2 years. So we had, and I alluded to, we have great plans on how we're going to change our Army to be better, faster, more capable for the 21st century. It doesn't matter at all unless you have the right people or people at all to man those formations. So we realized that we had to go to work, and this has been both the Secretary and the Chief, the previous Chief, General McConville, and the current Chief, General George. Their number one focus is to be able to do this. And we've reorganized the way that we take a look at recruiting command as an entity within the Army structure, and we've made it more directly reportable to the senior leaders in the Army. Before, there was multiple layers that recruiting command had to go through to get changes in policy, to get recommendations approved, to get money allocated. Now they meet directly and work directly for the Chief and the Secretary. The other things that we've done is, we've taken a look at the recruiters and said, do we have the right people? Are they volunteers? Do they possess the skill sets to meet with and interact with the environment and the population in a way that we need to? So we've changed our recruiting, and not that they're bad people, but we just have now said, we're going to choose differently, and we're going to train them and educate them differently. So now we have a series of warrant officers that are going to be involved, and they're not only going to help with recruiting, they're going to help with market analysis at the local level. Because there are, by anybody's stretch, less individuals in America that are capable of serving. and that's because of medical, that's because of other areas of physical limitations. Some of it's propensity that they just don't want to serve, and that's understandable. But because we have a smaller market, we have to be very laser focused on how to be effective, and I think that that's what we've been able to do. And I won't make any news here because our Secretary-in-Chief, and the reason why I'm here instead of Secretary Wormuth, who'd probably be much more effective at keeping your attention, not only because she's smart, but she's a lot better looking than I am, and General George, both reasons too, he's smarter and better looking than I am, is that they were testifying the day before yesterday in the House Armed Services Committee, and then today, I think real time, testifying in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And they have announced, and without saying, knocking on wood and saying, hey, we're not there yet, but it looks like we are going to be able to meet our recruiting mission this year in the Army of 55,000 soldiers recruited in the active force, and then 5,000 in the delayed entry program, which is a huge effort, Herculean effort to be able to achieve that through the good work of the things that I just explained. So we will be able to at least correct the glide slope and get it in the right direction. And I think the other services are going to see similar types of positive trends as well.
Okay, that's terrific. Thank you. So a couple questions. Well, I have too many questions to ask you with the time we have left. So rapid fire questions here. So one is obviously rightfully focusing on Taiwan, the Philippines, Korea, kind of the neighbors of China, direct neighbors of China. A lot of the conversation typically focuses there. Can you say anything about, and I think you were talking to this, building relationships with the less often thought of Central Asian states and partners? What can you say about, you talked about pre-positioning and how important and critical that would be to mission. What, can you say anything about those partners?
I can talk kind of an open source way and pre-decisional about some of these things, but really, as I alluded to, sometimes the best thing to do if you have an enemy or a competitor is just to let them do what they do and be able to take advantage of some of their shortcomings. And what we've been able to see over the past couple of years is through either their omission or commission of activities in the region, they have angered, they have pushed hard against some of these countries that, as you alluded to, that have created a window of opportunity for us, the United States and other allies, to seek new ways of forward positioning of equipment, exercising partnership with aspects of co-production of munitions and other types of things. And really, when you look back those 2 years in certain countries, whether it's the Philippines, we couldn't have imagined, and some of it's their domestic politics too, frankly, but we couldn't have imagined having the opportunity to be re-engaged in the Philippines at the scale and locations that we're at. And we're going to continue to pursue that. We're going to continue to pursue win-win types of relationships. And recently, with the Japanese Prime Minister being in D.C., we were able to announce a lot of partnership that we're doing with the Japanese, and they have committed themselves, like other nations in the region, to increased percentage of their GDP to contributing to their national defense. Again, something that we wouldn't have perceived just a couple years ago that the Japanese would be able to do. But because of the malign actions of the PRC in the region, they realized too that this is the right way to do it. So we're going to continue to lean forward and do what's feasible and acceptable within those nations and their domestic politics. We're not going to put things that they, in places that they don't, where they don't want them, or the types of things, but we're going to show that we're happy to be there and willing to support. And it comes out in things like last year when there was a weather-related event in the Philippines, and there was a significant amount of loss of life and infrastructure that the Filipinos handled, but they definitely needed some assistance, and they asked for assistance. We had forward position humanitarian aid and disaster relief capabilities at forward position within a country which we were helpful and allowed to tap into, and those types of things are just illustrative of how we can continue to build partnerships with them.
Yeah, thank you, Mario. Appreciate that. So, final question. And we talked a little bit beforehand. I can only imagine in that D.C. condo of yours, you're often waking up yearning for Tennessee, and to get back here. But what else keeps you up at night about the mission, about where we're headed, challenges that you're grappling with?
No, it's a great question. I won't give the Jim Mattis answer, to that. When he came back and said, "Nothing keeps me up at night. I keep people up at night." I thought that was a great answer by General Mattis. Very well to form.
Great answer. Great answer.
I'm afraid I don't keep anybody up at night besides my wife, probably by snoring or something like that. So, but what keeps me up at night, seriously, are really two things. One is, it's very much inside the Beltway and the processes, the way things work. But what I learned from transitioning from being a career military officer to now being a political appointee, which I never thought I would be, but it's something that I think I can continue to make a difference in, is I learned that so many people can tell you what to do with what perceivably is your money. Right? We get a top-line budget of $187 billion plus or minus for the Army, which is the smallest of the major services. It was flat across the board, where the Navy and the Air Force received some bump ups. We won't talk about that and why they got it, but but I knew that that Congress had a very significant power of the purse or power of the pen to say, we want these programs to be funded, we want these weapon systems to be resourced and prioritized. But I didn't realize how much inside the building that different folks get a chance to say, oh, and by the way, you're going to prioritize this, and oh, by the way, Army, this needs it. So that ability to do that kind of concerns me, because we have a great secretary of the Army, we have a great chief of staff, and I think they know what's really the best. And I think that is something that we need to continually be able to focus on and improve and advocate for, that we understand the needs of our soldiers, the needs of our families, and the needs that our nation will require us to be able to do. I think the second thing that really concerns me, and I think a lot of you probably share this, is that our environment has gotten, not just our political environment, but our domestic interactions are down at the lowest levels of our normal day in and day life, have gotten so hyper-partisan that we have so many things that tear us apart, frankly. And regardless of all the good things that gets done on a day-to-day basis, and if you want to be inspired, whether it's going up to Fort Campbell and seeing what goes on there, or meeting with the cadets that I met with this morning, or meeting with our civilian aides to the Secretary of the Army who are in our communities, in and around our installations, various demographics, various political spectrum, various religious, all colors of the rainbow, the cloth of our America. That's what is, I think, the reality. But unfortunately, sometimes, regardless of where you get your news, there's so many things that are highlighted that separate us. And I think that is a vulnerability for us. I mean, we talked about how we're trying to capitalize on the vulnerabilities of our adversaries or potential adversaries, and we're laser focused on that. I think that we need to be very cognizant of the potential areas that adversaries would be trying to exploit on us. So I get concerned that we have so many things that tear us apart. So events like this, where I can look across and see folks from all over, and the commitment and the relationship between the military and academia and local population, it may keep me up at night, but I'm reassured, and I'm ultimately a person that is a glass half full. So I think that that to me is encouraging, but it doesn't mean that we should rest or not be concerned about it and stay focused. So that's the two things I stay focused on.
Yeah, so listen, that answer was much more thorough than Mattis's answer. And in my opinion, was a great answer. So thank you so much, Mario. So everybody join me in thanking Mr. Diaz.